While Manhunt Episode 5 continues delving into Secretary of War Edwin Stanton's fight for civil rights and his search for John Wilkes Booth, the episode also introduces a brand new character to the Manhunt cast who will play a significant role in the defeat of President Abraham Lincoln's killer. His introduction begins at a Union base camp, where soldiers discuss the Mad Hatter, a soldier who previously worked as a hatmaker and tends to be alone, talking to himself. By the end of the episode, this Mad Hatter has proven his loyalty, passionately leading the search for John Wilkes Booth. Before the capture and death of John Wilkes Booth, the Mad Hatter was simply known as Thomas Boston Corbett. Born in London, Corbett immigrated to the United States in 1840. Around the time of the Civil War, Corbett became known for his strange behaviors, attributed to mental illness. However, in retrospect, historians have theorized that Corbett may have been affected by the mercury often used in hats at that time. Therefore, his hat-making profession likely led to his behaviors. In 1861, Corbett joined the Union Army and was eventually in the ideal spot to search for the escaped Booth. Boston Corbett and his regiment was sent to capture John Wilkes Booth. Corbett was part of a team ordered to find John Wilkes Booth. At the time of Abraham Lincoln's death on April 14, 1865, Boston Corbett and his regiment were stationed in Vienna, Virginia. They were promptly asked to search for Booth, who had fled into the night. Days later, they took part in Lincoln's funeral procession, along with other Union regiments, and they had barely left the capital before they were ordered to follow up on a lead about Booth. Eventually, on April 24, 1865, the call went out that Corbett's regiment was going to capture John Wilkes Booth. It took 2 days for Corbett and the other soldiers to track down and corner John Wilkes Booth and his accomplice, David Harold. As noted in Manhunt Episode 5, they found the assassin residing at the farm of a man named Richard Garrett. Corbett and the soldiers surrounded the barn in which Booth and Harold were staying. Though Harold surrendered almost immediately, Booth refused to exit the barn. Notably, he shouted out, "I will not be taken alive." This led to a standoff between Booth and the Union soldiers, and in particular, Boston Corbett. Corbett fired the shot that ended up killing John Wilkes Booth. Corbett saw Booth through a crack in the barn and shot him. Anthony Boyle as John Wilkes Booth looking confused in Manhunt. With Booth's capture at a standstill, the Union soldiers had to get creative to try and get Booth to leave his hiding place. First and foremost, they set fire to the barn to try and lure him out. Surprisingly, Booth continued to resist, despite the flames surrounding him. Notably, the soldiers stood in intervals around the barn, and Boston Corbett was in a spot where a crack stood out in the barn. Through the crack, he could see Booth. Corbett asked his commander if he could sneak into the barn through the crack and try to subdue Booth himself. Though the commander said no to Corbett's request, Corbett ended up being the man to take out John Wilkes Booth anyway. After discovering the crack, the commander stuffed hay through the crack to try and get the flames nearer to Booth. Soon after, Booth appeared directly in the crack, and Corbett could see him loading his gun. Corbett made a quick decision in that moment. He raised his gun and shot Booth through the crack. Corbett's bullet entered Booth's head behind his ear. Though the gunshot would eventually kill him, he suffered immense pain and paralysis beforehand.